calendar sitting in regular session. Consent calendar. We do not have any cards on consent calendar. Is anyone here who would like to address the board a consent calendar item only?
Mr. Chairman,
Supervisor Miller.
I'd like to poll and vote separately on item 6 on the consent calendar.
The award. Okay. Do you have any questions on that, or would you just like to vote separately?
I have some questions, yes.
Please proceed.
Okay, what I note on here is that this $994,000 is to the low bidder, and it is for a transportation enhancement project. And again, I see that we're using 10% of county HRF funds, which amounts to about $99,000 in background material. And my question is, why wouldn't we be using some of the transportation improvement funds, since this is an enhancement? The HRF funds, my understanding, are strictly for road repair, and that we have this money for capacity improvements and enhancements in the transportation improvement funding. It's on page 12 of the May 7th report that Mr. Chuckleberry put out. It shows there's $2.5 million in the Tucson Mountain District, which is where this is located, Homer Davis Elementary School. So instead of using the county HRF, which is repair money, to match the federal funding that we get, I recommend that we use the transportation improvement funds instead. Is that a possibility?
Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Chuckleberry.
Yes, Mr. Chairman and Supervisor Miller, I think what you're referencing is transportation impact fees.
Right, impact fees. I'm sorry.
Yeah. And the issue is I think that I'm pretty much positive state law would prohibit that. State law requires that transportation impact fees be spent for capacity improvements or capacity improvements related to the impacts of new growth and development. So it's just not possible.
So this is not a capacity improvement?
No, this is a safety improvement from an elementary school.
Okay, okay. Then I withdraw, my motion to change.
Mr. Chuckleberry? Chuck, just for clarity's sake, Supervisor Miller said that HRF funds are to be used for maintaining roads only. Isn't that incorrect, sir? In fact, don't HRF funds have multiple uses that are allowable under state law?
Mr. Chairman and Supervisor Elias, HRF funds are the basic funding for the Department of Transportation. And so what it does do is it finances everything, meaning their personnel expenses, their operating expenses, if you have enough capital improvements and maintenance. And so it is the primary source of revenue for the Department of Transportation, and it is not specifically limited to any particular category, but it does have to be spent for transportation purposes.
I just thought that would help the members. Thank you, sir.
I just wanted to clarify that any of the other funds that we have are not able to be used for road repairs. The only money we can use for road repairs comes from the HRF, correct?
Mr. Chairman and Supervisor Miller, yes, except that for the last few years we've actually been supplementing the HRF funds and the general funds of the county.
I was going to say there's a number of different types of funds that we can use to do road repair. We're not limited to any single one, so yeah, hopefully that will help clarify things.
All right, any other questions on the consent calendar?
Mr. Chairman, the supervisor has withdrawn her request, then I will move the consent in its entirety.
Second.
Motion to approve and second to approve consent in its entirety. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, please signify by saying nay. Ayes have it. Moving on to item number 9, Mr. Chuckleberry.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, this is actually probably a good place to start talking about transportation and all of the options that are out there. I have basically provided a very lengthy report to the board back in the first week in April and said that we would have a public hearing on this report at a later date to talk about the specific recommendations. In essence, as we all know, transportation revenues have been declining over the years for a variety of reasons, and that the demands on our system are actually increasing. I had, and what's new about this particular report is that it details by district and by road the actual long-term obligations of the county with respect to pavement preservation and repair in the unincorporated area. And the total price tag on that is fairly significant. It's actually $268 million, which is clearly beyond our capabilities to fund and to make significant inroads at actually getting our system back up to reasonable repair standards. Just last year, the board authorized, and we spent $20 million from a variety of sources that the board authorized in the previous fiscal year. $10 million of the ending fund balance, $5 million of general fund recurring, another $5 million of the HRF revenue ending fund balance. And so we've made, obviously, when we make a $20 million annual investment and only can accomplish 8% of the obligations, we continue to have issues and problems. What I've done is simply, and it's important for the board to understand that while we're all frustrated about transportation revenues, there's little that the board in its capacity can do to raise those revenues except raise those taxes. And that's probably not the most effective and most efficient way to do it. And that's why I've made some recommendations that might not sit well with some people because it really talks about raising gas taxes. And anytime you talk about raising taxes, the hair on the back of people's necks stand up. And so what I've indicated is that, putting things in perspective, the price of fuel when the gas tax was last raised in Arizona, and that was 1991, was 77 cents a gallon. And we had an 18-cent gas tax. And so that's 26% of the price of fuel. Today, the average price of fuel is $3.41, and that same 18-cent gas tax is only 5% of the cost of fuel. So we can work around the edges of this problem. It's all we can do is put band-aids on things for the next probably couple of years until we want to confront our problems straightforwardly. I provided the board yesterday with a supplemental memorandum because I kept hearing a lot of things that were what I call gross exaggerations or just simply misinformation with regard to transportation and investments the board's made. I frankly think the board has done a fabulous job at meeting the transportation needs in a very constrained environment. We don't have a lot of flexibility. When I heard that we're only spending $5 million on transportation out of a $1.2 billion budget, that became a little bit concerning. And what we really need to understand is that $5 million is a supplement that I recommended in this year's budget, and that we annually spend about $50 million, and that's the aggregate budget of the Department of Transportation, made up largely of the HRF revenues and vehicle license tax and transportation-related taxes. In addition to that, our concentration of transportation investment in the last 20 years has really been in new capacity improvements, and that's because in the previous 20 years, we were shortchanged by the state in the distribution of HRF. It was distributed on the basis solely of origin of fuel sales, and Maricopa County, who had 1/3 the population in the unincorporated area, got 3 times as much money as Pima County. And so we were able to make inroads and get HRF equity in 1996, where for the very first time we introduced into the distribution formula 50% unincorporated population, begin to give us some parity in the distribution of HRF revenues. We then said we're so far behind in capacity improvements in this region, we need to bond that. Well, we bonded it, but we forgot that the election was a county-wide election where everybody gets to vote, even though county HRF revenues are designated for the unincorporated area. And so we made a commitment to share our revenues with the city of Tucson out of a comment by the mayor who said that unless he sees certain significant investments in the city, he wouldn't be inclined to recommend that his voters not approve the bond election. So we basically included those improvements. When you then look at the last 5 scrounging and getting every dollar we can. Doesn't mean we can't do better, but we've done fine as opposed to what some people have insinuated that we haven't done any transportation. The recommendations I made to you are kind of, they're ones you got to think long and hard about, and I fully have a realistic vision of our capacity to cause change, and I don't think we're going to get the Arizona legislature this session voting on a 10-cent gas tax increase. But I think the conversation has to start, and I think we have to be realistic enough to understand that we really have to solve our own problems. And this is a statewide problem. It's not isolated to Pima County or the city of Tucson. It is basically embedded in every city and town in Arizona, every county in Arizona. And the state transportation department finally, cracked under the stress of HRF diversions, where they actually have an alternative program to put project back because the state legislature diverted HRF revenues. Obviously, they're under the executive branch in the state. You can't say much, but the cities and towns, if you just look at the diversions of HRF that have occurred in the last 10 years, money that we previously had spent in transportation, repair, and maintenance, it's been $39.2 million of diverted money. If you had the diverted money from every city and town, including Tucson, Sauterita, Valley, and Marana, you would be well over $100 million of diverted money that would have gone into, should have gone into highway maintenance. So I think, the combination of recommendations I've made to you are serious. Some will be successful, some won't. It's not going to solve the problem overnight, but it's a good start. And we have to basically, I think, look at our problems realistically and not, blame it on the other guy or think that somebody else is taking all our money. With one exception, is the legislature that's been approved. So I think, the recommendations I made to you are the ones that I would ask that the board endorse, and so that we can begin to take the next policy steps as directed by this board to talk seriously about transportation finance.
Mr. Chairman.
Supervisor Carroll.
Thank you, Mr. Chuckleberry. Mr. Chuckleberry, I've read over your report, the supplemental piece as well, but the interest I have is how's the coalition building coming for your people that work our legislative body, and number two, how has County Supervisor Association of Arizona reacted? Have they seen the memo? I know you want to cast a wide net. I've had some suggestions from people that have called my office saying that other best practices in transportation departments are in the United States have in fact been like the bus wraps that you see around town, but been selling advertising all the way to try to supplement the transportation costs of road repair monies. What other ideas have you heard, and what ideas are you interested in including? If the CSA is not on board, I think it would be a great idea if we try to get them on board. They represent the 14 other counties. And they do so well in lobbying the legislature, so please let me know.
Yes, Mr. Chairman and Supervisor Carroll. Just the fact that we raised the issue that the 1 cent diversion of the gas tax to the underground storage program is expiring has basically got people with the legislature really aware of the issue. And so I think they were going to let that bill expire without any real comment until we finally spoke up and said, you ought not do that. And so it's moving, but it's going to take a while. I think the other thing is that CSA, County Supervisors Association, we've historically looked at these issues, and Pima County, because of our large unincorporated area population. We have the largest unincorporated population in Arizona of any county by a factor of 2 to 3. And so therefore, we're always on the leading edge of policy discussions with regard to meeting the needs of our unincorporated areas. And so I think we're kind of probably the leaders on that discussion. I don't think that discussion caught up with the rest of the counties in Arizona, although it's beginning to all feel the pinch, and probably Pinal County more than anybody else.
Mr. Chairman?
Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, pardon, excuse me, continue. I had a follow-up question for Mr. Huckleberry. When it comes to the CSA, are you prepared to forward this report, or how soon do you feel it would be ready to go out and make a presentation to the counties that would be interested, especially the rural counties that have just as many voting senators and House members as do the large urban counties?
Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Carroll, we will make that presentation as soon as the board authorizes it. And so, again, this is a policy document. It's something that obviously is going to require before we do anything, the board's concerns.
Okay, and when I ask you that, I also ask, who do you see as the opposition to your plan of possibly raising, whether it's a gas tax or whether it's keeping it taxed at 1% that's for leaking underground storage tanks, or any of the other ideas that you had in your memo, any follow-ups of information?
Yes, so Mr. Chairman and Supervisor Carroll, I don't know if we really know who would be opposing with regard to the 1 cent with regard to underground storage tanks. We know that potentially the environmental community may want to see that, want to continue to go through that particular program. We really don't know the status of it other than it's been around 20 years. And we would assume that most everything has been cleaned up or fixed, and that the orphan sites should have been taken care of. The only sites that are remaining have really corporate structure that can't afford to pay for it. So that would be probably the only area of concern there. And I think that just the general reluctance, because it takes a 2/3 majority to get taxed through in Arizona by the legislatures. You know, we have a lot of people that pledge not to raise taxes that aren't going to support it.
Well, I think it's a separate category of tax when you're talking about a revenue stream that's earmarked for a specific use versus, let's say, ordinary sales taxes that go into a general fund. But thank you for the help. I understand that, with the legislature wrapping up, hopefully, with them on limited per diem and other incentives to close down, the governor putting pressure, that it's probably too late. Maybe I wouldn't want to say that you don't have an open door still, but I appreciate getting the information from you as soon as possible as to when you're going to plan on going to CSA, so we can be aware of your efforts and see if there's any categories of this plan that we feel inclined to lobby for. Thank you.
Where's Miller?
I have a question for Mr. Huckleberry on his memo that he sent out yesterday regarding the $50 million that we spend annually. It was my understanding that $5 million was going to pavement preservation. However, you have $50 million. Is that $50 million all going to be road repairs? Are we going to repair roads, or is that for salaries and overhead for the Department of Transportation?
Mr. Chairman and Supervisor Miller, it's for a variety of purposes and sources. For the salaries and the equipment and the operating and maintenance costs, and for debt service for the highway user revenue bonds that have been authorized already. About $17 million will go into debt service. 12 or 13 million, I believe, is in salaries and costs of operating the department. In addition, there's always been an allocation for maintenance, and that allocation will remain the same, but it will be supplemented with $5 million that's coming from the general fund.
So my understanding is that we have the 30 million, the 17 million for debt service, 13 million for salaries, and the 30 million will be in addition to the 5 million will be going to actual road repairs, pavement preservation projects.
It's a, Mr. Chairman and Supervisor Miller, it's a variety of sources. We can break it down by category, and I don't believe it's $30 million for road repairs. It depends upon how you classify road repairs. If you put our operations and maintenance division salaries into that, then probably yes. So, what we can do is do a line item breakdown of the Department of Transportation budget and get that to, because a portion of it goes to even County HRF, goes to supplement some of the capital program that is continuing to implement the bond program.
So, okay, so what I'd like to see is a schedule of just how many miles of pavement preservation we plan to do next year, and that'll make it very clear, because it's 213,000 per mile per year schedule, so we can figure out how many miles and how much money is actually going to be spent. That's the data that I would like to see, so that we know exactly, and we can tell people exactly what we're spending, because there's numbers being thrown out all over the place, and the $5 million was my understanding from my discussions with Priscilla, that that's what was going to be spent on road repair, and now I'm hearing that there's additional monies for that, so I want to make sure that I'm clear when I explain to people exactly how many miles of road repairs we're going to be able to do next year. And maybe that's where the confusion lies, in that we don't have a schedule of that, so I'd really appreciate that. In addition, regarding the 10-cent a gallon gas tax, that one really concerns me, because one of the things that you identified in your report was that the reason that people stopped driving was because of the price of gas increasing. And if we increase gas taxes 10 cents a gallon, we're going to hurt the people that can least afford it, the people who drive to work every day that don't have electric cars, that don't have hybrid cars, the people making $15 an hour that come to work in the county that can't afford to buy an electric car. So that's my real concern with that recommendation. And some of the others I'm okay with, but I think a gas tax increase is going to have a very negative effect. I think as it proved in the past, as the gas prices rose, people drove less, and so we ended up with less HRF money. I know it's a quandary, and I know it's something that we have to solve, and I think a lot of these recommendations are good. They need to be studied, but the gas tax increase is a real concern to me. Thank you.
Other questions? I do have two speakers.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chuckleberry?
Yes, just a couple clarifications for the board and Supervisor Miller. The $5 million is general fund, and yes, it's earmarked for pavement preservation and repair. And then as you looked at the report, there were a variety of costs per mile depending upon the particular road selected. And so they're not all 213,000. There's a cheaper, if you do this, there's another amount, there's another amount. So it's you got to pick this mix of streets and highways in which to spend that money. My guess is, in addition to that, probably no more than about another $2 million is just what was typically average annually spent on pavement preservation, so we can get to that. So it brings maybe the total to $7 or $8 million if this $5 million is approved by the board. And the specific roads and will be then obviously something that the board gets to decide in the budget process as we move forward and allocate that money. So I think it could be X miles of road if you pick this strategy and these number of roads that require a certain type of repair. It could be an entirely different length of road if you pick another group of roads that have a different repair requirement. So that's kind of that point. I think on the gas tax increase, one of the things I think we'll see is between now and Memorial Day, I'll bet the price of gasoline goes up 10 cents a gallon.
Mr. Chairman, I had one more comment on that, is that the various road repairs, 72% of the roads in District 1 are in failed poor. So that's the 213,000 is for roads that are in failed poor condition, and 61% of the roads in Pima County overall are in failed poor condition. I was assuming that we would look at those roads first, but because these roads that are in failed poor condition are a safety hazard, so that's why I made the assumption that we would attack those first and try to repair those so that people aren't driving on unsafe roads, children aren't riding bicycles on roads that are falling apart, our first responders aren't riding on roads that are falling apart. So that was why I made that assumption. When we have 61% in failed poor condition, I don't know why we wouldn't look at those first, but if anybody has any, Priscilla, do you have a comment on that? Why we wouldn't be looking at those first and going to some of the other less important repairs that we have to do?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Supervisor Miller, we were looking and considering and developing a program to be presented to the board in terms of the $5 million that we have for the next fiscal year. And in some ways we're torn. Should we do like a minor seal coat at $15,000 a mile or do you do the total overlay a mill and replace for $213, $213,000 a mile? What we had been sort of thinking about is doing pavement preservation to treat roads before they fall into the failed category. Because we do have such a large number of roads in poor or failed condition that we can barely touch them. As you sort of said, that we spend $5 million and we're only doing less than 100 miles of roads. But that is something we can provide that to the board in terms of what are the options that we have with the $5 million.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I understand correctly, the dollars that were approved, or the tax rate that was approved for that gasoline tax back in, was it 1991, is worth 51 cents on the dollar today? Is that correct? So that's a drastic change over that 20-some year period. It's unfortunate. I think Supervisor Miller used a good word when she said quandary. It is a difficult situation. And the residents of District 5 are in that same quandary, and they pay the same rate of taxes on their homes as anyone living up in District 1. So I would suggest to you that those dollars need to be equally used across every single district, despite the jurisdiction that they existed, since all those people are paying their taxes exactly the same as everyone else. Leaving District 5 off the table because 90% of it is in the city of Tucson is wrong. So I'm afraid that that money really needs to be distributed across the board equally to make sure that all our taxpayers get their bang for the buck. We have a huge amount of roads in District 5 that are in failed condition as well that need to be repaired. We're not going to make it to all of those. I understand that. We're not going to make it to all the roads in District 1 and 2. I just want to make it clear that District 5 is going to be treated fairly with general fund dollars that are spent on road repair. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I wasn't making any suggestion that all of the money go to District 1. I was talking about...
I know you weren't making that suggestion. I just want to make myself clear.
Please let me finish.
Thank you.
What I was talking about is 61% of the roads in the county overall have failed and 72% in District 1. And I wasn't asking that all of the money be spent in District 1. I was just trying to clarify the point with Priscilla as to how they're going to prioritize the roads. So I just like to make sure that people understand that I'm not asking all the money to go to District 1. This is a very difficult situation, and I think we all understand that. It's going to be tough to solve. And we have to work at it together. And I think I like the fact that we're getting some general fund money. I would like to see more, but I also understand we're in difficult times. So we need to look for monies anywhere we can, how to save money, ways to save money, and to be able to fund our roads as much as we can in a very difficult situation. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, and I just think we got a lot of clarifying to do on this board lately, so I'm just helping along the clarification process.
Mr. O'Brien, you had a comment?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think that, obviously the distribution of those funds is going to be up to the board, but you could spend $5 million in any one district and still not scratch the problem.
All right, could I add one more thing to this thing as I was thinking about too? And I'm really glad to hear Supervisor Miller saying that she's willing to consider any of the options that we have out there to continue on this calendar, because that's the kind of spirit it's going to take to get this problem under control here in the state of Arizona, not just here in Pima County.
All right, I have two speakers. Let me just remind you all that you'll have 3 minutes. Let me call Ramon